Hello, and welcome to episode number 17 of 11FS Spotlight. In this weekly show, we shine a spotlight on the best and the brightest in tech and financial services to try and understand what gets them going, growing, and what they think about the future of the industry. So today is brought to you by MyTech, digital identity verification trusted all over the world, secure more high-value customers while reducing risks and costs with MyTech, a global leader and enterprise partner in identification verification technology. Well, that's quite a mouthful. Just before we get started, we wanted to let you know that the British Bank Awards are just around the corner. Voting for 2021 is now open, so it's time to have your say and decide on who will be crowned the winner at the Oscars of the banking world. 11FS has been nominated for Consultancy of the Year and Pioneer of the Year. So if you like us and you'd like to vote for us, just head over to bit.ly/British Bank Awards 2021. If we do win, incidentally, I think it will be third time running. So please, please help us to achieve that. Alrighty, so let's get started. On today's Spotlight, I'm delighted to be joined by Will Jones, who is the Director of Design at 11FS. We're going to be talking about 11FS's approach to creating modern, iterative brands that help create genuine connection with customers and their culture. Hey, Will, how's it going?
It's going well. Good to chat about this. Much like everyone else, I'm just sort of chilling in my house at the moment, which is not much else to do. I apologise for any sort of boxes and things over my shoulder. I'm moving house next week, so that should add some element of excitement to my life.
Yeah, absolutely. No, you're totally right. And I think this topic in particular is really exciting, really relevant to everybody in financial services or digital, to be honest. And I think brand building is something that's, quite magical and is seen as a little bit elusive. There's always some kind of marketing and design wizardry that happens, and people don't necessarily get to hear about exactly how it works. And I think particularly for engineering and product, it's really, really interesting because it's sort of one of those things that intersects with everything that we do day to day.
I think you're right, and maybe less so now, but I mean, there always used to be this mystique around how brands were created and how certainly the identity for brands and straplines for campaigns and things, everyone assumes this, some highly creative type squirreling away in a room and coming out with that thing. But hopefully what we're going to talk through today is a bit more of a process and how it's sort of involves a lot more, research and can be done alongside product development and is no longer sort of shrouded in mystery.
Exactly. Maybe a little bit of mystery.
Maybe a little bit.
Okay, so a big part of the show is obviously your involvement, the viewers, and your questions. So we love getting them. And if you want to leave them in the comments sidebar, I can get Will to answer them for you today. So let's start off by getting to know you, Will, and what you do at 11FS. Can you tell us a bit about your role?
Yeah, sure. So I head up our design tribe. So all of the design we do, whether it's sort of our marketing communications, the internal products that we build, and the businesses that we create for our clients and customers, there's an element of design to most of that. So my role is to make sure that all of the things we produce and the processes and the practices and the way that the team develops and grows is something that means we can be successful, and more importantly, all of our clients and customers can through design.
Mm-hmm. And in terms of your background, what have you done before, and how did you end up at 11FS?
So I've been at 11FS for sort of about 3 years, since the early days. I know a lot of places that sometimes makes you one of the newbies, but as everyone's probably seen, a regular viewers, we're still a fairly young business, but I've had quite a lot of growth. Before this, I was a creative director at a digital agency, and I've worked at various digital agencies, both in London and up north in Leeds. Quite a lot of FS experience, being part of the rebrand of one of the world's biggest banks, as well as smaller sort of strategic experience design pieces. But alongside that, it's not just been FS. Worked on sort of pregnancy products, as well as sort of rideshare startups, things like the automotive industry. My background's really in brand and experience design, and how those two things work in harmony. But yeah. Go on, sorry.
No, I was just going to say, definitely a really rich background. I always find working with you actually that you draw inspiration from so many other industries and not FS. So yeah, maybe that's why you've got such a breadth of experience, that you're able to kind of pull really unusual things in and not be too constrained by sort of fintech examples.
Possibly, yeah. And I think in the team that we're growing here, we're hiring at the moment. That is a shameless plug. We always look for designers that have a diverse background as well, because I think if you're just focused on one industry and only look at what's going on from a design perspective in your industry, you're not taking advantage of all of the sort of advances that are happening in parallel products that solve other parts of people's lives. And because finance is at the heart of all of our lives and most of the interactions that we have, it feels really relevant to know more than just what a good banking app looks like.
Okay, so in terms of MLB, so people might be familiar or unfamiliar, I don't know, with MLB. We've got a great design booklet on exactly that, but could you explain more about what it is and who it's for and what it does?
Sure. I mean, just for starters, I know the world doesn't need another acronym, but here you go. Specifically, MLB is minimum lovable brand, and that sounds very familiar because it's sort of a riff on minimum lovable product, which I'm sure most people viewing this will be familiar with. It's that feeling of simply being viable is not enough when sort of creating the first iteration of a product. You don't just want to test functionality, you want to release something that has the greatest amount of affection from your early adopters with the minimum effort. So that's MLP, but minimum lovable brand is a huge part of that. How can you sort of garner affection from your early adopters without any consideration for brand? So it's an approach to brand that recognizes sort of a full branding process as we typically recognize it is very expensive, it's very long, and it's far more than a startup needs just to get a product to market. So a minimum level brand approach, it focuses on sort of a slim set of activities and ingredients that really are the important ones that help you sort of really nail down exactly how you should be speaking, looking, and even developing your product. So it creates those foundations from which to build. It allows you to appeal to sort of your early adopters now, but evolve as it scales, because you haven't sunk all of your time into creating every single asset under the sun, or assuming that your brand is finished when you release something. It's actually about bringing those really core foundations that understand the right things about society and the customers you're creating it for, and gives you that first set of ingredients to be able to be saying the right things, looking the right way, and creating a product experience that doesn't just have the right features and functionality, but actually starts to create this sort of brand experience that can make it much more lovable as you grow.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and in terms of, I guess, timing and the attention or the depth of the effort that you place around brands, do you think that that's germane just to, startups and really early stage companies, or do you think there is an element of evolution in more mature brands as well? And is there some kind of tension between what is out in the market already? So say if you've got billboards everywhere and like buses with your logo and etc., do you think that could be a problem for more mature brands?
I think it is, and I've seen it sort of firsthand, where actually if you've got sort of a big global brand, especially if they've got a lot of like physical assets and lots of staff and a culture that already exists based on a certain purpose or set of principles, that's really hard to like take that giant oil tanker and then steer it in a different direction. Whereas I think when we're talking about a minimum lovable brand process, that is definitely more well suited to new businesses that maybe haven't launched yet, or sort of existing young businesses that have maybe tested an MVP, they didn't think too much around brand, and now they're looking to bring a more sort of developed proposition to market or target a specific audience or segment. And that, but that's not to say there aren't elements of this that are useful to every brand, but I do want to recognise that a rebrand of a large organisation is very much a different thing to what we're probably talking about today.
So when we're looking at like lovable brands, I think, you know, lovable is one of those words where we think we know what that means, but can you break it down? Because I think it's a little bit more scientific than that.
Yeah, sure. Yeah, it'd be interesting to go into both terms, sort of minimum and lovable, because I think there's often a sort of misunderstanding of both, or everyone has a slightly different interpretation. Because I mean, like love is a complex emotion to use a slightly strange phrase, but to put that into context, like people frequently say they like love a TV show or a bass line or something like that, but they don't mean love in the same way as say they love someone that they're married to, for example. Like there's such extremes of the emotion you feel, from like something that's seemingly banal to something that's very important in someone's life. Now, I'm not trying to say someone can love a brand as much as they love like a partner or a really good song, but what we try to have a look at is actually the idea that it's a sliding scale of lovability, which I know is awful to make up a word and try and coin it. Stop trying to make lovability happen. But the way that I break it down is kind of into 4 levels. Initially, someone needs to love your brand enough to think, I would use this service. And really, we're looking at that first level being, you're going for appeal. You just want your brand to appeal to someone. So you want a proposition that's sort of been effectively communicated to justify its value to the customer, so they think it's cool, they want to give it a try. So that's kind of just making sure that your benefits are aligned to customer needs and goals, and sort of your design and language is sort of holding a good mirror to that audience and that culture. But then you want to get beyond that, to be honest. If someone's just downloaded your app because they think it's cool, if they never use it again, a lot of it may be down to features and functionality and actual experience, but the brand layer on top of that, brand should come through experience. And that's where it can just be something that functionally does a job versus something that like someone can actually love how it makes them feel. And that comes from like really understanding how to execute brand in the product experience. There's probably more to say on that one, maybe a bit later on, but sort of that third level we see is authenticity, like actually having a great product that appeals to someone and has a great experience. It doesn't necessarily make it feel authentic to people in the thing that you're doing. Like you want them to be able to buy into your mission and make sure that actually it feels genuine in the way that you've understood like cultural tensions and woven that into your purpose as well. And then the final one is actually like reaching that level of love where someone is openly an advocate for your product. Like talk about fangirls and fanboys who, even if like a better product came along with superior services, they'd be so into being like a Monzo person or an Apple person that they're not going to switch. It's part of their identity, and that really comes from nurturing a community of customers and making customers actually feel like they've been responsible and they're on the journey of the brand's growth and like they can affect it. So, you know, opening channels around new features and product development with those people. So there are levels to what we actually mean by lovable. I know it's a very long answer to a very short question, but
no, it's
complicated.
Really, yeah, it's really complicated. But I love your comments around like community and nurturing that as well. And obviously that is really important within you know, product development and customer testing and breaking down exactly what the customer wants so you can make more informed decisions and decide where to invest, etc. So I guess from a branding point of view though, what is different about 2021 versus traditional branding processes? So if we're looking to build something this year,
yeah,
how would it be different to how it's been before?
I mean, it's a great question. I mean, firstly, I guess there isn't one set branding process, and there never has been. If we're comparing 2021 to say 15, even 10 years ago, the way that consumers actually engage with brands, obviously that's changed hugely. There's a lot more brands just launching and being experienced exclusively in digital, and that very much changes sort of digital seat at the table, to the point where it's not even anything we need to talk about anymore. But if you look sort of 15, 10 years ago, like your digital team, as they were then, would be the one waiting for scraps from the brand table and all the above the line agencies going, here you go, here's some colors, here's some fonts, see if that'll work. Try and weave that into an experience. And anyone that's been in the industry sort of 10 years or longer will recognize that. But obviously in recent times, branding has been much more about weaving that digital experience into how that brand is even created, and the recognition that you can iterate a brand alongside iterating that product, and making sure that it's sort of woven through the product experience itself. Obviously, we've got sort of better data, better ability to target in digital as well. There's much less guesswork involved. So we talked at the start around the mystique of creating brand. It's no longer about having a strapline that resonates incredibly well in a focus group, because we can do things like spin up landing pages and actually do demand testing and actually see how a brand is resonating with the people we're creating it for before putting that thing live. It's a lot less guesswork these days. There's also, I guess, the idea that experience design is kind of brand itself. Like, people love little moments within apps, and that becomes a hallmark of brand. It's not just what they see on the billboard or on the TV anymore. There's also kind of what customers are concerned with. Now, obviously, labels are still a massive thing. It's the difference between this price point and this price point, especially when it comes to cars and things like that. You can have exactly the same one, but one's a Porsche and one's a VW. It's the brand that makes the difference. I think it's Dave Trott that says that in a very good article. But actually, like, modern customers, especially younger ones, are more concerned with things like values and ethics, and how much of a focus you're putting on innovation or conservation. And actually, they look for brands that align with their own values, and whether engaging with this brand has a positive impact for society. Whether they are like equal opportunities employers, and how much of that brand actually comes through into the culture of the business. So I think brand these days, very much rooted in a digital experience, and very much can't just be an empty promise. It needs to have a real understanding of those other things.
Yeah, it's interesting what you say about empty promises as well, because I think, if we want a brand that resonates with lots of different types of people, that speaks to the kind of best version of ourselves and is really quite lofty and just holistically good, that may not have the desired effect either. So it's sort of where do you start when building a brand? I mean, is it an iterative process? Should you try and intensively focus on this at one stage of your development?
Yeah, it's really interesting, because it's going to be different for everyone. But my answer is as early as possible. So I think often in the early stages of a business, you've either found out something really incredible about customers where you see an opportunity, or you've had a really good idea. And often that really focuses around, okay, how does that translate to features? How does that translate to us answering those customer problems through what the product does? But it's at that point you should also be thinking about the foundations of brand, because if you are actually developing a brand purpose that's a response to what's going on in culture, what's going on with your customers, that purpose can help inform the actual proposition that you have, what your unique value is, and then it can translate into the visual language and make sure that sort of the marketing language, and make sure that that's a response to like a real customer understanding. And the whole brand is then driven by purpose, not just what it looks like, what it says, how it's experienced, but even sort of the roadmap. And it can affect like how the company is run, and it can feel more authentic from the start. So where do you start? I'd say at the start, which is a slightly silly answer, but I think it's true.
And so when we're talking about, I guess, ingredients of the MLB, you touched on it just there when you're talking about authenticity, but I think that's to help people start, that's sort of around the story, isn't it? The story that you're trying to tell.
Yeah, that's right. Because I think when we think about sort of minimum lovable brand, when we talk about the sort of the story, that's kind of the first principle that we have underneath it. So we try to break this down into sort of 5 principles that make it a little bit more accessible as a process. The first is sort of creating a genuine connection with culture, and that's what when we talk about story, that's what we mean. So a brand story is sort of understanding how culture shapes your customers' worlds, their ideas for how they want to progress, and the tensions within culture that shape how they see opportunities and things like that. And actually, your service then can create sort of more of a meaningful contribution to that culture if it understands it. And we can come on to that a bit more in a minute, but sort of that first principle is really around creating a genuine connection with culture. A second one is actually making sure that your brand purpose is not just connected with that culture, but connected with customer needs. It's probably quite evident to lots of people when a business's purpose is really just to grow, make money, and sell off, or compete with this guy, or mimic that person that's already in the market. And actually, when there's a distinct purpose that feels genuine, it kind of shines through. The third, I guess, principle is actually adopting a digital-first approach to branding. That's not to say ignore your billboards, ignore any physical signage, but it's recognizing that that's the first place someone's usually going to experience your brand. So don't retrofit a brand that's been designed for billboards or bus stops. And then number 4, sort of only creating what is necessary. We've already gone through that in terms of the idea of what is the minimum, but actually putting no brand into the first thing you launch doesn't really tell you much about how it's going to be received. It just tells you whether the features work. And putting too much effort into brand at the start means you've blown a lot of budget, you've put a lot of effort, and it's harder to pivot after that. So it's following sort of a minimum frame of ingredients and a minimum that works for you based on, for example, like whether your offering, audience, industry is slightly different. So it's finding what's needed. And the 5th one is just how you go about brand. So baking that brand development into your product sprints, and making sure that it's not this separate team that's gone away into a room like we talked about before and gone, here's your brand. It's about testing it, and you can start doing some of the UX writing and having it flow through into the product development. And that can teach you as much about your brand as it does about your customers as well. So I just wanted to call out sort of those 5 principles, because I think they help govern an approach that's quite flexible depending on how people want to use it.
Yeah, I definitely think so. And also how I guess one might go about communicating the logic of this to other stakeholders in the business as well. And on that point, Justina has got a question, and her question is, skeptics might argue the notion of lovability is just a big biz way to escape the loyalty issue. What are your thoughts on breaking the ice on the UX PR branding ground without leaving the C-suite or hard-boiled techies behind? So I guess this is sort of around, positioning and defining your purpose in a way that feels a bit more accessible, I think.
Yeah, that's true. And I mean, I think the bit we haven't touched on is that we've said, it has to be a win for society and it has to be a win for the customer, but it has to be a win for business as well. And I think that's how sort of you bring C-suite along on the journey. I think sometimes there's a danger of putting it to a room of people who, are at the top of a business to help them decide the words you're going to use and what your principles are and what the business actually is. And I think the secret is to take them along on the journey for how you discover what the customer problem is, how you discover what that almost decoding of culture looks like, and make sure that you're baking any positioning, any story to be told around that, and make sure it actually connects to them a tangible benefit for the business and a route to making money, because it's all well and good creating something sort of with a purpose with brilliant UX, but it needs that business model behind it.
Yeah, absolutely. And on that, I guess, I think, yeah, it's sort of around focus as well, isn't it? So avoiding what you're saying in this, the brand booklet, like word soup, essentially. So are there questions that we can be asking ourselves, or businesses can be asking themselves to avoid word soup, or trying to do like a splattergun approach to everything?
Yeah, I mean, the areas, I suppose, of brand that you see loads of word soup, and as in, we like the sound of that. That tastes delicious. Look at it. Look at these words. We love them, and have that actually quite disconnected from like the customer or their culture. I think it's about marrying those two things up. So, like thinking about sort of purpose and positioning as part of a minimum level brand approach, they're nothing new. They've been part of brand for ages, whether you're arranging them in an onion or a butterfly or anything else. I think there's what this approach does is says, actually, if you're doing an exercise where it literally just feels like people in a room picking the words they like just for the sake of it, like say you're trying to come up with all your beliefs and your values and killer statements, actually that might be wasted effort at this point. If you've translated what you know about your customer, whether that's through a jobs to be done framework where you've really understood their root needs or something similar, and you've done a really good job at decoding their culture, through, say, a stories to be told method, which you can read more about in the handbook, like making sure that they feed through into initially, I guess, a customer manifesto. And customer manifesto, when written well, is an incredibly powerful thing, because it's a demand of your business from the customer, spoken using their language, spoken using their understanding society, the tensions within that, and the need states created, and also how they're being let down by current businesses to not fulfill that. That's an incredibly powerful thing to put in front of, say, a C-suite or anyone making decisions, and then use that to drive like your actual positioning and purpose and your tone of voice. And I think that is the way to avoid word soup, which means you're just picking things you like the sound of, and you always end up with like values like we're human and we're open. And I could pick a number of other ones. These are all good values, but unless they're driven by sort of real understanding and feel differentiated, they're almost hygiene.
Yeah. And in the brand creation process, do you think that, do you think that companies should be testing these customer manifestos with real people as well? Or do you think it's something that a team of creatives can dream up on their own?
I think it is really important to sort of test these things with customers, but it's almost, you can do that in an abstracted way, where if you just hold a manifesto to a customer, you can have them read it, you can see whether it represents them, but it won't always be entirely accurate. You're trying to represent sort of a group of people. It's more how that translates into almost promises to them, or the messaging of how you're communicating your proposition. If that's a direct translation from a manifesto and informed by all the other stuff we talked about, it would be really clear whether you've kind of got it right or not.
Yeah. And so we've sort of coming towards nearing the end of the show. I've got a couple of questions left to ask you. So the first one is, when thinking about brands, what do you think, if there's one thing, what do you think that could be that startups and businesses need to keep in mind in order to create an impactful and successful brand? What's your kind of major tip?
I'm going to give you two. I know you asked for one, but I think one is something that we've talked about already, which is making sure that what you create is an actual answer to a real societal need, rather than just a copy of something that exists. Because we've seen loads that have aimed for feature parity. Your brand needs to look right and sound right, but it's not. It doesn't come across as unique, and you're always playing catch up. You have to work incredibly hard then with marketing spend and how you push the product and how you incentivize sign up. If it doesn't feel through its messaging and its brand like it has an authenticity, or answers an unmet need for a group that maybe has been ignored by banking before. Like the bar is much lower there, and we can get a lot more organic growth. And one thing I guess we haven't touched on is kind of, if you've got your story, you've got your positioning, all of that drives the actual execution and the design of it. And I think the other thing that startups and businesses need to keep in mind for success is how that brand translates into the product experience, because I think it's so easy these days when you are aiming for something that's really minimal as a product experience. Obviously, it looks great, it's on trend. You want something where there's minimal nuances of brand, but that is where you have to get it absolutely right. And this is where we have the idea of sort of high brand moments and low brand moments. When we talk about low brand moments, really, we're talking about that band of consistent brand execution that runs throughout like the core of a product experience. So it's having things like your iconography, taking nuances of your logo mark, making sure that your typeface and your color rolls are consistent, but then also peppering little micro interactions and sort of small movements, transitions, button behaviors that become a signature of your brand. Those are the little dopamine hits, much like when your favorite character of a TV show says that catchphrase you like. They're those little dopamine hits that build up your love for a brand and keep you coming back. But then when we talk about high brand, that's where you know that it's not a really functional moment. You don't need to pay yourself back, and you can really shout and align yourself with a real customer win. So it could be, for example, in Monzo, when you've ordered your card and you get a little dancing guy, that's a high brand moment. It's a silly high brand moment, but it's fun. Like same as Asana's unicorn animation. But it could also be something that's connected with the like the real core function of what your value proposition is. So if it's making a payment abroad, make that feel like a signature, and finding ways to do high brand moments and low brand moments, and how someone can actually experience your brand, not just through design, but also through every little bit of UX writing. That is the thing to get right. And that will make the difference between, oh, it's just another clone of something that exists. Those two things, sorry. And, oh, this is actually a really lovely experience. It's building my love for the brand. And also it really gets me and aligns with my values.
Yeah, I guess that's also a way that, if you're starting out, there's a few companies to mind actually that are bringing out things like debit card products and credit card products in the UK, but perhaps they could use those high and low brand moments to really differentiate and, as you say, make things feel a bit more unique and fresh. So if you are a startup though, and you've got, I suppose, limited resource, and the strategy that you might have is to emulate another brand or another fintech company that's doing something well, how do you decide on those high and low brand moments? What do you have any advice around picking out one or two unique things that they might do?
Yeah, I mean, obviously it's an uphill struggle if you're sort of just aping the functionality of something else, unless your brand is specifically targeting a discrete segment or has a feature within there that you can hero, because a lot of the stuff you're doing is hygiene. It's about finding that one thing that you do really well and going all in on it, I'd suggest, because without that, it'll always be a bit of a struggle and you'll always have to do sort of loads of marketing around it. But I think, I guess, like your high brand, low brand moments mostly around whether something is functional and your brand needs to be secondary, or whether you need to, I guess there may be sort of 3 or 4 areas where you can really dial up the brand. That's whether it's a unique feature that's yours and you really want to shout about it at that moment of success, whether it's generally aligned with a customer win, whether you need to offer a little additional reassurance. So often when something goes wrong, that's a moment to dial up the brand rather than down, or when there's a really big decision to make, like dialing it up through how you sort of bring your tone through. Even like long form content can be a high brand moment, because you are sort of providing a bit more brand expression and educating people. And then finally, if you're trying to upsell premium features, think about how you can use like a more expressive brand execution and a little bit more of your personality to make those things feel warm and nice and an extension of all the things about your product that people already love.
So I was going to ask you how new digital brands can sort of punch above their weight in 2021, but I think you've answered that really well. It's basically paying attention to Will and doing all of the things that you described above.
I hope so. The other thing is timing, though. You have to get lucky, but avoiding just trying to compete with people on feature set, I think, is a really important one. Baking brand in from the start, taking time at the start to understand not just customer but their culture as well, then using that to inform your purpose, and then iterating your products, your brand, alongside your product development, and then just being prepared to pivot once you've learned what your product is in the market. Because if you haven't sunk a load of time into brand, but you have some really great core foundations that understand why you exist, you can keep true to those, but kind of flex on how your brand execution is. And I think that's a really key way to win, because you can punch above your weight by solving a real cultural problem rather than trying to compete on a level playing field with people that probably have a far greater marketing budget than you.
For sure. Okay, thank you so much for that, Will. I think it's coming to the end of the show. I'm guessing the nudge from our producers, I could carry on talking to Will about this all day, and it's dreamy to have you on customer problems and projects as well, Will. Thanks so much for joining me. Where can people find out more about you and what you're getting up to?
That's a great question, and one that I'm very rarely well prepared for at the end of these. You can find me on LinkedIn, just Will Jones 11FS. That is probably the most up-to-date social channel for me. So yeah, cool. do reach out. It'd be great to have a chat on this further.
Very good. So to learn more about Minimum Lovable Brand and to download our free handbook, which was written by Will, plus several other people within 11FS, I think Matt, Vanessa and Ryan Garner, I want to say.
That is correct.
Yep. Cool. Yep. All amazing. Good eggs. Head over to bit.ly/11FS MLB. Okay, that's all we have time for. Please don't miss another show. You can catch up with our other shows. Actually, this one, Newsroom, which goes live on Tuesdays at 3:30 GMT or 10 AM Eastern time. And in the Newsroom show, we take a deep dive into the biggest news stories of the week. So that one is a good one to catch up on too. All right, have a great week, everybody, and goodbye.